Reclaiming Timeless Ways, Mike Traster, Simon Fuller. Glad to have you along with us today for yet another episode. And Mike, you just never run out of good stuff to talk about, my friend. Another show on the docket.
Yeah.
What path are we going to take today? If you were to throw a title out for today's show, what would it be?
It has to be Fubar.
Fubar it is.
Beyond Fubar. So
Beyond Fubar.
Beyond Fubar. So I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to tell you a different story than the one we've already gone through.
Okay.
I'm working in the psych facility, and one of the nurses comes up to me. She's probably in her late 50s. Nice gal, a little naive, you know. I'm sure she was a well-trained nurse, but clueless. Anyway, so she comes up to me and she's like, Mike, I gotta talk to you. She goes, I know you're really excellent at interpreting things that have symbolic meaning. And I'm like, okay. She goes, I'm gonna change the guy's name. She goes, oh, Big Jim, on the back of the facility. I'm like, yeah. She goes, something's really terribly wrong with him. Big Jim had like a history of family psychosis. And when he would go off gloriously. So she goes, you gotta come and look at this stuff in his room. And I'm like, what are we gonna find back there, And did he strangle somebody? And so anyway, we get back there, and there's this monster on his bed. He took like books and pillowcases and blankets and plants and pens and anything he could find, and he created this monster on the bed. And she looks at me and she goes, her eyes are wide open. She goes, I've never seen anything like this, Mike, and I know you're really good at interpreting things. And I'm like, oh, what does it mean? And I'm like, it means that today is Halloween.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh. And she kind of runs out and disappears. And I'm like, hey, John, Jim, he had a great sense of humor. He's an extremely smart guy, and he had this terrible impairment. So a lot of times we try to look for stuff that's not there.
Sure.
Right? And it's crazy, that we don't just apply normal curiosity and awareness and attention to things.
Attention being one of the key words there, paying
Right.
attention, really dialing in.
Right. What's actually happening here, right?
And in order to pay attention, you kind of have to want to. You have to give something there. That's not just in passing. That's not just being around. That means you have to make yourself available to receive.
Right. Very much.
Yeah.
So if you're a walking dictionary, you're absolutely interesting and worthless. Completely. You can entertain people at your family dinners.
Yeah.
And you can sit there and look down your nose at everybody because you spent 2 more years filling your dictionary than they did.
Right.
They only have a master's degree and you're a doctor. But it doesn't mean that you're useful.
Right.
You could be dangerous.
Right.
Because you make lazy assumptions.
Right. You can be useful, but that isn't what makes you useful.
No, because you have to care.
Right.
A lot. You have to be passionately caring. And that's the story I was just telling you.
Yeah.
So I check into work one day in this facility outside of Boston, and a facility that has not earned a good reputation over the years. And I walk in this guy's room, and he's tall, 6'2", I'd say 45-ish, 50, and strapped in 5-point restraint. So both wrists, both ankles, and a big strap around his waist. And he's not going anywhere, but he's slamming against these restraints. He's scary because he was developing an enormous amount of explosive force every time he moved against these things. He wanted to get out of there and hurt somebody bad.
He was angry.
Oh, he was in a rage.
Yeah.
And he didn't look rational. So I go outside. I'm like, I hope he doesn't break loose. And I look at his chart, and this is a long time ago, so I'm going to try to remember. I think it said he was Parkinsonian, He was psychotic. He was aphasic, or he couldn't speak. He had rheumatoid arthritis, and there was one or two, it was about 5 or 6 things that were, and it was like, each one of these things was like a lot.
Yeah.
But altogether, it was like, this
Wow.
poor guy, yeah, you know, I mean, Wilt Chamberlain slam dunked him into a cement wall.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this poor fool. So I go back in the room, and he's screaming at me, he's slamming up against these things, and I'll forego the imitation. But it was like, do you ever see one of those colored baboons? They're called mandrills.
Yeah.
Right, and you know how they're always in this rage, right? And so he's like this, and I'm like, oh God, this is crazy. And I keep looking at the straps. So I point my finger in the air, and I'm like, you know, like, wait, or I have an idea. And he looks at me and he goes like this, and I'm like, you don't speak. And he gets back in this rage. He's slamming, and he just gets worse. So I'm like, so he understands, no, you don't speak, right? That's kind of like universal.
Right.
So he gets really infuriated. So I'm thinking, wow, he is crazy and he is dangerous. But I'm also aware of the fact that he understands my question, right? So there's something upstairs. He hasn't checked completely out of the hotel, right? So I look at him, and I'm like, I hope he doesn't get loose. He's gonna try to hurt me, and I'm gonna have to stop him. And I notice he's shaking, right? So I'm like, you know, why are you shaking? And he gets more rage, you know. So he's upset, you know, and I figure it's Parkinson's, you know, he can't control himself, he's embarrassed and whatever. But I stopped and I kind of backed away. I don't remember if I physically backed away or if it was just in my mind, trying to collect my thoughts in the middle of this riot of anger and noise. And I looked at him and I'm like, why don't you walk? And he gets angrier, and he's going like this now with his hands, and his hands are, but he's strapped, so I'm not sure if he's showing me something or if he's just limited in where he can move, right? But he's looking at me and he's going like this, and he's pointing down. So I'm like, well, I'm thinking maybe he's pointing at his feet. And I'm like, can I look at your feet? Can I look at your feet? And he's like, you know. So he's afraid, right? So I'm like, I look at him, I go like this, like I'm going to lift your leg very careful. And he's like, oh, you know, but he's afraid, but he's rational for that moment. He knows I'm not going to come at him like a bulldozer or like I'm insensitive and cruel. Right, I'm not sadistic.
Yeah, you're not there. You're not showing any harm. You're not there to do any more harm to him. You know,
and this guy is he's somewhat rational, and he's not unintelligent. And then all of a sudden it hits me, and it's like a cartoon. It's like he's exaggerated his facial mannerisms and a little bit I'm getting with his hands and his shrugging. I'm like, this guy is not American, right? And I'm looking at him, and I get this funny idea, and I kind of push it out of my head, and I almost start laughing. And I'm like, God, I can't do this. Like I was telling you, it's like laughing, because you think of something you don't want to think of funny at a funeral, and you want to run out because you're going to laugh, and everybody's going to want to kill you, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, oh, I can't laugh. You know, should I have to leave the room and compose myself? But I keep having this same image. And I think it was Harpo from the Marx Brothers, and he always did this Italian pantomime, right? And so I'm like, no, it can't be. And I'm like, I got to wipe this out of my mind because I'm being mean. I'm laughing at this poor guy, right? But I'm thinking, I keep looking at him, and he keeps doing the same crap, and I'm like, no, I'm not mean. This is what I'm seeing. This guy is not American. I think he's Italian.
Yeah.
So I look at him again and I go, wait a minute. Are you Italiano? And all of a sudden he's like, ah. So it's like he's home for a moment.
Right.
He has one word that makes sense, right? And I was like, wow. Okay, so he's got these terrible wounds under his feet, and that's what's causing him to shake, right? And he doesn't speak, maybe because he's got some aphasia, or maybe he has some psychosis,
But he understands.
He understands, right? And there's somebody home, right? But I'm looking at him and I'm like, I don't think this guy's got rheumatoid arthritis. And I don't think he's Parkinsonian, and he's not completely crazy, right? And he's definitely got some speech capacity, maybe limited, I don't know.
Right.
But he's not American. His English is not his language, right? And God knows how long he's been circulating with these diagnoses that were written by idiots who were on their way to a luncheon where they were going to show each other how important they were instead of looking at their patient.
Yeah.
These were people that needed to be imprisoned because they had committed criminal acts of abuse against this man, criminal neglect, right? And so I'm like, wow, what a nightmare. Towards the end of the shift, so I got all these different diagnostic opinions, and I tore each one to shreds, demonstrating what I had experienced with him and observed. So I'll go home, and the next day I come in and I figure there's going to be new light, right? Somebody's going to go, oh my God, thank God you did this. You figured it out. You know, we've got a social worker and this and rehab.
Maybe an interpreter.
Yeah, right, right. For this human being, right? Not a prisoner, a patient.
Right.
And so I go in his room, bed's made, nobody in it. I'm like, this is weird. So I figured, okay, he's out, he's getting a shower, and they fixed his bed up. So I go to the door, no chart. So I asked somebody, where's so-and-so? I don't know, who's that, you know? So I go to the director of nursing, and she looks at me, and I said, you know, what's his face? And I can't remember his name, doesn't matter. But we'll call him Louis. I said, you know, what happened to Louis? Who? I said, you know the tall guy that was in 5-point restraints? Who's that? I'm like, he was here yesterday, and I charted on him in great length because he had a bunch of diagnoses that were all incorrect, and I was able to demonstrate that, and it blew my mind that nobody could see that, you know. And she's like, she looks at me very angry, and in a kind of a threatening tone, she says to me, there has never been a patient like that here. And I'm not catching on completely because I want to pursue this, you know, and I want her to tell the truth. So I said, no, you know who this guy was. I dealt with him. I charted on him. She goes, you don't understand. There has never been such a patient in this facility. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm like, wow, this is a treacherous place, you know. So I don't remember how much longer I stayed, not very much. I got out of there and did something else. But it made me wonder how much of this shit goes on.
Yeah.
You know, am I allowed to say shit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's the appropriate word for stories like that, Mike. I mean,
right.
And how many more are there like that? Some as severe, some less severe, but all of them in their own way, a form of,
oh boy,
I don't even know how to describe it. It's just unimaginable.
Right.
That I guess it doesn't surprise me, but it's unimaginable that we try to protect ourselves more than others in those situations. That's what it was.
They're helpless.
We got some things wrong. We don't want to get caught.
Right.
We don't want to get on the wrong side of a legal battle because we screwed up. So let's move them on and keep out of sight, out of mind.
I don't know.
Who cares about him?
I mean, it was like each one of those things was like, it was like a man in water cold water, and each one of these diagnoses was like a heavy iron chain.
Yeah.
And he's trying to swim and not drown. And each one of these iron chains is weighting him down, pulling him under, right? He's got 5 of them. And, I mean, here I am, medically uneducated at that point. I'm just this technician or whatever you want to call it, an assistant. But in that, because I cared and I applied my mind, and I see this as a suffering guy, and I'm not a bleeding heart by any stretch of the imagination. I really am not. But I see this guy, and he's a trapped animal.
Yeah.
But he's smart, you know, and he's helpless. He's just been painted into a corner. He's not just literally in restraints. His whole life is a restraint.
Yeah.
He's a prisoner.
Yeah.
And he's being abused brutally by a system. And I'm like, and it's like everybody fluffs all this stuff up so it looks like they're doing good when they're doing bad,
Yeah.
you know, in these circumstances. I'm not saying that everybody in the medical field is bad
No.
or an idiot or should be punished.
Right.
But there are, let's be very careful, let's be very kind and say there's 10% idiots out there, and I think I'm understating the problem. But, and you know, credit where credit is due. There's some wonderful people out there doing amazing work.
Yeah, and what you're saying is that title gives them, when they make a diagnosis or say this is the way it is, sometimes we don't second guess that, or we don't give it another thought, or we don't look into it.
Right.
We say that's how it is, move on. And that's, I'm sure there was something wrong with this gentleman, Louis. As
Oh,
you
I think a
referred to.
lot, right.
But instead of truly digging into it and spending the time,
Right.
effort, and energy,
Right.
It was easy to say, yep, check these boxes, that's what he's got,
Right.
chain him down and move on.
You remember the old stamps that they used to have? They were like steel, and they would rotate. And so, like, you'd go and you'd pay a bill, and somebody would come and they go,
Oh,
"Ka-ching,"
sure,
right?
yeah.
So, like, there was 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 jackasses with masters and doctorates who all went ka-ching, next, ka-ching, right? Oh, he's
And
got
that's the end of it.
Parkinson's, and he's done. He's trapped. He's got an iron chain around his neck. I think he's got rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah, look at his joints. Ka-ching. You know, he can't talk right. He's a phasic. Ka-ching. Did anybody ever say, does this guy speak English? I don't think they cared enough on the way to their little luncheon where they were going to present themselves with an award and then go home and show it to their mommy. Mommy, look how much smarter I am than Jimmy or Barbara. See? Right? And it's like, you know, these people that are like that, they do great harm and they get away with it and they get rewards and awards and raises.
Yeah.
And they're untouchable.
Yeah.
And it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong. And they should be feeling pain for what they do, you know? And it reminds me, you know, in a sense, in a very real sense, it reminds me of Christ flipping his lid in the temple when they were selling animals and exchanging money.
Yeah.
Right? And he literally was whipping people and turning over tables and strewing things and throwing people out. He wasn't polite. Why? It said that he was tempted, but he never sinned. Well, if he never sinned when he did that in that circumstance, the circumstance was sinful, and his anger was appropriate. It wasn't sinful.
Yeah.
And we are so intimidated to express outrage and express it in 3 dimensions
Right.
when it's completely insane, right? That we all sit there and we're timidified. Let's make up a word, right? We're all timid to the point of like cowering poodles
Yeah.
in the corner. Oh, don't kick me, you know? And it's like, so we become useless to the people we're supposed to defend,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it. So I have a rule that I always tell people. I say, if you have a loved one that's being given medical care, especially in a nursing home, where good is done but bad is done also, where people are energetically focused and also don't give a rat's ass, right? where people protect their property and also steal their property, always pay attention. But pay attention to what? Everything.
Yeah.
Well, how do we do that? You love this person, you just observe and you ask questions.
Yeah.
And then the second, I was talking to this guy the other day, his mother had gotten ill, and I don't recall what he had said. It was a brief conversation. And she was up in a hospital in Sioux Falls, and I said, let me tell you the one rule. He said, what's that? I said, when you are dealing with a loved one that's vulnerable, right? And they're powerless, they're sick or they're hurt, and they're afraid and they're isolated, and they're in somebody else's environment, right? The question comes to your head that you say to yourself, oh, I can't ask him that question. That'll piss him off. That's a question you have to ask.
Right.
You must ask that question.
Yeah.
Because you smell something wrong. You just stepped in something, and it's like you walk in the house and you're like, I smell dog crap. You know? You don't say, are you making porridge?
When you're afraid to ask that question, really, Mike, what you have to say in your own head is, what could be the consequence if I don't ask the question that you're smelling? It's probably far greater than pissing somebody off.
Exactly.
You know, and I know that's hard. I know I can feel that or sense that in my own brain that, God, that's uncomfortable.
Right.
That's not fun. But what are the consequences of not asking that, potentially?
Right. Yeah, they could be astronomical. You could have a dead person.
Yeah, worst case scenario, you could.
Right. So, two other stories. Gal calls me up. I don't know if I ever talked about this, but it's worth repeating if I did. And she's an administrator of a nursing home. Did we ever talk about this one?
I don't know. I'll know in a minute.
Okay. And she says,
heard about a few administrators. Is this one that you weren't real fond of?
No, we were friends.
Okay, then maybe I haven't.
We had considered dating, but I just wasn't attracted to her. Anyway, she goes, I got a question for you. So she had a business degree.
Okay.
And rather than medical training. And so she says, I got a friend. She called me up last night, and her husband's been very ill. He's got AIDS. I don't know if he played around with drugs or a bad blood transfusion, but he was maintaining. But all of a sudden he got very sick, and he's like in a coma. And the doctor says he's brain dead. He's basically dying, and his brain is gone. What do I tell my friend? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I've never met this guy. I've never met his wife. I'm not a doctor, but I do have some experience and some sense and a fire in my belly. Yeah. And I'm like, what's wrong with this question? What's really going on here? They're in a hurry to unplug him. And I'm like, in a hurry to unplug him. And I'm like, whoa, let's get that out of I don't want this in my face. Like, imagine you're the person.
Like, hurry, make a decision. Yeah.
Right, make a decision means kill him, right? And I'm like, okay. So, he's in a coma? Yeah. He doesn't feel anything? No, he doesn't feel anything. Can't think? No, can't think. Can't hear? No. He's flatlining. I said, so let me ask you a question. She goes, what's that? I said, so he's not experiencing any discomfort? No. He's just there. He's like a vegetable. And he's going to stay in its vegetative state. I said, so if he stays there for 6 weeks and there's a 5% chance that he could recover, 1 out of 20 or 1 out of 10, let's say, what's it going to hurt him if he can't feel anything? She goes, oh, I don't think my friend thought of it that way. I said, why is she being rushed? Is she being rushed because of resources, which is not the right way to rush somebody, or to end the stress on her, which again, that prioritizes her stress over his life, or end the stress of the staff, just, the staff again, get moving on, put it on the conveyor belt, get rid of it. Or is it because it's in some way kind to him? I said, if it takes 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 6 months and he wakes up and he's semi-conscious and he can communicate a little bit and he wants to be here, should we deny him that? No, but they said he's not going to wake up. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, here's what I want you to do. talk to your friend and tell her what I said. And tell her to really pay attention to all the signals she's getting, right? So she goes, okay. And I said, do you remember what I said? Because we went over a bunch of details. She goes, yeah. So she did, and she was talking to the doctor. She didn't like his attitude. She didn't like his answers. So she gets another doctor involved, I think with a lawyer, because they try to get in her way. So she had some legal paperwork, and this other doctor comes along, shows up with an ambulance, and discharges the guy in his care against their will, against their strenuous objections. They want to off this guy. They want to get him checked off, right? Done, scratched. Roll up the paper, 2 points, done, okay? So he gets delivered to this other hospital, and the doc that she hired brings him in, takes one look at him, and he's like, oh, crap. He goes, so he has his chart with all the medical information on it, and he looks at the nurses that are doing the intake, and he goes, do not give him any medications. I want all of his medications stopped. 24 hours later, he's sitting on the side of the bed conversing.
Yeah, you did. I do remember that story as you were going, and it is worth hearing again.
Right. So I don't know how much longer he lived. You know, he's not in a coma anymore because he's not toxic from over medication. You know, and since then, this was a long time ago, but since then, I mean, you know, there are people, including some famous athletes, who've lived with AIDS for decades. Yeah. So maybe he's one of the lucky ones, yeah. You know. But again, they were going to write him off.
Yeah.
Right? And there's one more, and this is a guy, he's like the Mad Hatter, and he's spoiled, he's very entitled, extremely foxy, just clever, and nuts. And
what a combo.
Oh boy. And just got everybody spinning in circles trying to fix him. But he doesn't want to get fixed. Anyway, he's extremely intelligent. He's got 2 advanced degrees. One was in science, another was in law. So he worked in the chemical field, and he created new ideas, and then he patented them, right? One day he went off the deep end. He wound up, I don't know how long his decline was, if it was like this or if it was just a slow, steady slope. So he had like $500,000 or $1 million or $1.5 million in the bank. And they kept him in that hospital to treat him every day until the last nickel was gone. And then guess what happened?
See ya.
They told him he was well. No more money, no more hospital. He was sent to like a pauper's halfway house. Suddenly, coincidentally, of course, because nobody did anything evil with his money, of course not. We wouldn't say that, would we?
How could it be?
No, like it wasn't like $1 million or $1.5 million or whatever. That suddenly, just the great coincidence, right? How could it be that the moment that this guy's money is gone, he no longer needs their expert, deep care? Yeah. So, those are my stories for today.
And just a few of probably many. And those watching, I'm sure, have experienced in some capacity something similar.
Yeah. Right.
Or know somebody who has.
Right.
And it's sad. And the reality is, we talk about this show helping one another, speaking up, taking care of one another. This is just one of many, many stories. It's not just medical field. You see that kind of stuff everywhere. People taken advantage of by the bigger guy or gal, and everybody else hush up.
Right. Shut the F up.
Because, I'll destroy you.
Right.
And so we sit back in fear, and we don't stand up, and we don't ask questions, and we don't make sure we're doing what's right.
Exactly.
And that's really the theme of it. And I, like I said, I'm sure viewers have had something similar that they've experienced or know. And it's I guess this episode is just to help you maybe think about this, think you're not alone, and you should stand up.
Right. And when you feel bullied and cornered, You go think it through, and then get yourself somebody to back you up.
Yeah.
Don't isolate yourself.
Yeah.
You know, get some backup, and then come back and say, no, bullshit. This is not going to end here, and your will is not how we're going to do it.
This is not right, and I want you to know I know it's not right.
Right.
Yeah.
Very much so.
All right.
So, yeah, back off, rethink it, but do not give up.
Yeah.
Do not
Right.
give up, because there's somebody in a very delicate state, and they're about to get written off because of your fear.
Yeah.
Right? And your fear, if you deal with your fear and you look at yourself and you say, okay, I am afraid, this is a normal human reaction, I'm being manipulated by people who have dark intentions.
Yeah.
You know, they're either incompetent or they're idiots or they're corrupt or some combination of those. And it's like, okay, I say it, and if I acknowledge that those are the things that are intimidating me, that it's natural for me to be afraid, and then I can regather my resources
Right.
and come back,
Yeah.
not just quit.
Right.
Do that.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that would be that show.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike, for sharing. Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of Reclaiming Timeless Ways.
Don't let your fear rule you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Don't give up, because somebody delicate is depending on you. Literally, their life may depend on you.
Very good. Thank you. Have a nice day.